I am very grateful to be here, and I'm amazed that I was actually asked aloud to share this book that I've prepared with the church, because it's not the kind of topic that is normally discussed in a church. At least I don't think so, or in churches that I had been in before. It's poetry that came out of a healing process. I was abused as a child. The abuse started when I was 2 years old, and it continued on. There was one sort of abuse that continued on until I was about 9, and then there was another abuse, sexual abuse by my father when I was a teenager. So it was like that kind of stuff. Well, I did not realize most of that was hidden away, you know. When you're a little kid, you just don't hold that kind of stuff if it's so painful and dangerous, really. So I did not even remember that early stuff until I had gone through the process of learning more about myself, learning how to be strong within myself, and finally strong enough to actually deal with what was happening. And learning that all of this stuff destructive behaviors that I was going through, that I had just, well, that's me, and it was just, you know, like kleptomania, suicidal depression, really skewed beliefs about sexuality, all of those things. And it's like, oh, that's where that stuff comes from. That's where it comes from. And oh my gosh, once I recognize where it comes from, now I can have kind of a handle on it and do something about it, change it. Realize that my life was not how it needed to be, or how it could be, or how I imagined it could be. And then say, okay, now how do I get there? So I had counseling, and I had therapy, and I had support, and there were groups, and there were people, and there was stuff that I read, and was all of that. And while I was going through that healing, poetry started pouring out of me. All kinds of poetry. So, now here, decades later, I mean, that was a long time ago. And now, decades later, I have sifted through all of the stuff that's most relevant. It to me seems most relevant to people who have experienced abuse and who want to heal. And my hope is that in putting this all together and just putting it out there, that the people who could be helped, find hope or encouragement from what I have to say, will get it. They'll be able to. It's online. You can read it for free. I did a little funding thing and was able to get 60 copies of the book made. There's copies on the table over there. There's business cards here that have the URL for the website if you want to read the entire book or part of it, copy it, print it, do whatever you want with it. But the idea is that I want anybody here who knows somebody who might find this stuff useful to be able to take this and pass it on, or take a book and pass it on. My next step is we'll be sending letters out to therapists and saying, okay, here's what it is. If you want it, I'll give it to you. So, the book itself, it has 4 sections. The first section is I called Struggling with the Residue. And it's like all of the ways that this kind of stuff showed up in my life before I was really aware of where it was coming from. That's struggling with the residue. And then there's a section on remembering. And this is actually the place in my life where I started to say, oh, that's where this stuff comes from. And then there's a section called healing. And this is when I'm actually grappling with the issues and finding a way to resolve. So, and then the final section is called Finally Finding Myself. And of course the book is called Finding Myself. And finding myself, I would not have been able to find myself if I had not if I had not found resonance with the world, with the natural world, with the seasons, with the plants and animals, especially plants, somewhat animals, but mostly the plant life and how it grows and how it changes and how it moves in cycles. And so finding myself, that section, has some of that in it. So I would like to, if you have any questions along the way, jump right in and ask me. I would like to read you a few pieces out of each of those sections. And I gotta warn you, this first one's kind of intense. Well, a lot of it's intense. A lot of it's intense, but a lot of it's very hopeful. You know, when I've shared some of this stuff with people who have been abused, the most common response I get is, that's exactly how I felt, but I didn't know how to say it. So, this first one is called Helpless Rage. It started a long, long time ago when I was too young, too small to protect myself. When the anger born of fear and pain was useless against perpetrators so powerful. When anger brought with its expression even more terror. I learned to protect myself with silence by withdrawing inside myself. The anger, now rage, outrage, was silent, my face a stone mask. Rage, burning, seething, with nowhere to go, crackled, seared, blackened, crisped my insides until I felt dead and empty. Helpless rage is numb. Even now, 40 years later, the numbness fogs my mind and leaves my body and slows my body whenever I'm faced with being too small for what needs to be done. Whenever something is awful, but I feel helpless to change it. Whenever I'm angry. Sometimes it makes my head pound. Sometimes my stomach flops and a flush of nausea tugs at the back of my throat before the deadness settles in. I know that I feel too small because of my past. I know that I feel helpless because of my past. I know that I get angry because of past fear, but somehow knowing doesn't help. Is there a way, some way to heal the child I was? Can I time warp back decades and save her? And if not, how then can I be saved? Once beaten into submission, she had learned not to fight, saving her anger instead. All of those years of packaged, stored up, unscreamed rage she gives over to me now. What am I to do with it? Where can I unload it safely? How can I be rid of it so it no longer enters my life? So that's struggling with the residue. You know, at the time I started to remember, there was all of this stuff about false memory syndrome and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of like, is this what I'm remembering? Is this really real? But I had two memories, where it was like, yes, it was validated. Yes. What you remembered, here is proof that it was there, something happened. So it's like, okay. So then there's the remembering part, and this next piece is called clues. When something happens so horrible, so frightening or overwhelming, that to hold it in consciousness would shatter the mind, the experience is locked away, sealed in a secret place, stored away for a future time when accessing and remembering and processing and incorporating the experience is no longer a threat to sanity. Clues are left behind to point the way so that we can find them when it is time. Anomalies, persistent dreams, innocuous events misplaced chronologically, fragments, compulsions, phobias, all clues. With questions. Okay, this one's called Trying to Sleep. So much trauma, so much programming. My mind finds it impossible to break through the barriers and to remember. But my physical body remembers, and my emotional body remembers. Throughout the day, I notice that my jaws are clenched, and though I relax them, I find them clenched a few hours later. I notice that my head aches. In the morning, a forgotten dream has left me feeling uneasy and filled with dread. And I notice that every night I read until my eyelids cannot stay open, and I realize that I'm afraid of what I will feel or see in those moments of relaxed guard before sleep can take me. The clock says 12:48, then 1:15, and then 2:58, and then 3:54. I am awake until fatigue consumes me and I sleep from waking to sleep with no transition. I don't want to wake exhausted every day. I try to be sensible and get plenty of sleep so that I can be refreshed for the next day, but it doesn't work. If I try to sleep too soon, the wake-sleep transition takes too long. And though my mind refuses to remember, my body surges with fear, and I tighten, and my arms flap and flail, and I want to scream, but I whimper instead. I want the comfort of a touch of another, but my body mustn't be touched. I stiffen and shrink away. A hand on my shoulder is all I can tolerate. I cling to it like a safety line. Sleep has deserted me again. My legs are restless. I cannot lie still in bed. Nervous fingers comb my hair, nervous hands ring while my feet fidget and toes twine. I tighten, twitch, and wiggle. It is there. I can feel it, though I refuse to see it. Who can help me through this? I need to cry and scream, but the apartment walls are thin. Then comes the healing part. It's like the part where I start to recognize where all of this is coming from, actually pinpoint it, get a name to it so I can grab it and hang on to it and fling it. So this is called the wall. Held in so tight, the horror, the fear, held in, bound in, walled in, the rage and shame. If the wall were permeable, disaster might seep out. What was visible from the outside was only minor amounts of desperation, apathy, and aloofness. An impenetrable wall. It kept in the violence and mayhem, but it also kept in any love, tenderness, and bonding. It kept out hurt and betrayal, but it also kept out affection, support, and pleasure. It took 40 years to breach the wall safely, stone by stone, and allow love to penetrate. I hope my children can do it in less. Hanging on to guilt. As a child, I might have been hurt badly by what my parents did or failed to do, but I didn't blame them. To truly know, to fully comprehend that what a parent does is wrong or perverted is too terrifying and too world-shattering to be held in the mind of a small child. The very survival of a child is in jeopardy at the parent's whim. I think it may be written in our DNA that such doubt is impossible for little ones. To question the fundamental rightness or wrongness of a parent's actions only becomes possible when survival is possible without them. Children cannot blame their parents, so they blame themselves. I blamed myself, believing to my core that whatever happened to me was my fault. Later, as an adult, uncovering the secrets that my mind, in order to remain sane, had hidden from itself, I came across this false belief, this shame, cast in the concrete of survival. It seemed impenetrable. The little girl I was, and still am, fears for her death if she should let go. If I am guilty, the implication is that I could have chosen differently. And if I had, the outcome would have been different. But if I acknowledge my innocence, then I have to admit and feel how powerless I really was. I had been choosing to feel guilty rather than face the terror of such helplessness. It's a myth. Time does not heal. What happened, how it felt, make it buried, make it known, but unless attended, the wound remains affecting my life whether I'm aware of it or not. It is there, ready to color and contaminate my perception about what is happening today. It remains stuck inside of me, ready to deceive me into believing that freedom is not possible. But healing is possible. It's just that time won't do the healing for me while I wait passively, mistaking emotional numbness for the healing I seek. If I really want healing, I must take an active part. I must admit how I really feel. Even the petty or ungracious, angry, violent, self-destructive, vindictive, sad, small, helpless, lonely feelings, the ones which aren't nice. I must allow myself to experience the emotions which roil around inside of me. I must let myself feel. I would rather feel the grass fire flash of anger than the long smoldering of unvented resentment. I would rather feel a moment of terror than experience a lifetime of low-level anxiety. I gladly choose a few days of emotional anguish over years of bitterness. Emotional energy now flushed away. I am now able to, and I must let go. Let the past be the past. Different kinds of therapy. One was in unusual, maybe it's not unusual anymore, at the time it was, it's called psychogenic release therapy. And the idea is that you cry, you'll release all of that energy. And the idea is, that was one kind of therapy I went through. The other was more traditional therapy, okay? But the psychogenic release was very useful for me. The idea is that if something happens, you've got this memory. So there's the memory, and then there's the emotions around that. But there's the decisions that you made about what reality is. You know, this happened, you make a decision about what reality is. It's all encrusted with emotion. If the emotion is never blown away, then you can never look at the decision itself. You can never see how the decision is attached to that particular thing. And once you can see that relationship, then you can say, okay, but that's not true anymore, and you can make a new decision. But you can't, in terms of psychogenic release therapy, you can't get to that place until you break through the crust of the emotions that are clogged up around it. So a lot of the stuff that I did with this woman was just cry. And then she would ask, what did you see? Who was there? What was going on? And that was the extent of what she would say to me. And then the poetry would come, and the journaling and all of that. But yes, I did have support. And there was support also in the form of AA. There was a support in the form of Codependence Anonymous. There was an AA type of group for survivors. And all of those, plus some wise people that I ran into and were teaching me things at the time. And so that wasn't therapy, but it was therapy, you know. Thank you. I'd like to read another one, if that's okay. This one's called Going On. I don't know where I will end up, but all things are being changed and readied for the new. I struggle to find the security of old footings, but the ground melts underneath my feet as I try to stand in yesterday's world. There's nothing to do except go on, but in front of me is fog so thick it blinds me, and each hesitant step is an accomplishment of faith. Faith that ahead lies what I am to do. Faith that the ground will be there when my foot comes down and I will be supported. Faith that the numbness and the fear will end. I want to cry for days and let the tears wash away my fear and heal my heart and clear the fog.
Rebecca, did that faith have anything to do with God, or was it more of faith in your journey?
Repeat the question.
I've always believed that there is a higher, you know, in AA they talk about higher power. I've always believed that there is a great other something out there, always. Now, call it God. Is it, you know, is it masculine, feminine, you know? Is it whatever, you know? To me, it's a very, okay, it's not in the book. It was in the book and then I took it out, but I'm going to tell you a story.
All right.
I was at a church retreat, and this guy came. A group of us had gotten together and had rented this condo while we were there. Okay, so this guy came in. He said he could channel, and I said, okay. And I was just learning about woo-woo kind of stuff at that point, and I thought channeling was something really cool. And so I said, well, cool, would you channel for me? And he said, sure. So I asked him a question, and he started to answer, and what he was saying had nothing to do with what I asked, and so I kind of tuned him out. And then he's continuing to talk, and I realized at some point that he was actually saying something. And so I tuned back in, and when I tuned back in, this is what he was saying. If you ever despair, remember, I am with you always. We stood together hand in hand at the beginning of time. And you chose this path. And the rocks are like beacons of light showing your feet where to go. And when you said that, I remembered. I remembered standing there with this presence, a comforter, not a hand, but a wing around me, looking out at this path, and it was torturous. I mean, it was war-torn. There was craters and boulders and torn up concrete and everything, you know? And I looked at it and was like, oh. And then it was like, okay, well, I knew that I could choose a different path. I could choose an easier path. And I also knew that there were those who could do those easier paths but couldn't do this one. Okay? And then I also knew that there were others who could do much more difficult paths, who, if I chose not to do this one, they would step in and they would do this one. But then that more difficult path would still need doing. So it was like, okay, I chose this path because I knew I could do it. And it was that knowledge that I could do it that then sustained me as I started to remember. And in my remembering, I remembered angels. There was the white angel with wings, and there was the blue angel of light. I remember them. So do I have faith? I have faith. You know, do I have faith in a power greater than myself? Absolutely. And that faith was definitely important, an important part of my process, my healing. Thank you for your question. I think we have time for a couple more. Okay, so I'm now in the section of finally finding myself, and this poem here, this is the first one in the section, it's called Forgiveness. And it actually was inspired by, I don't know if you know this guy, his name is Rabbi Ted Falcon, but I heard him give a talk one time, and he said something about forgiveness that made a lot of sense to me, and this poem came out of that. Forgiveness does not mean that I will forget, or that I condone or capitulate. I do not deny the pain or anger or fear that I felt or still feel. I'm not saying that what happened was right or inevitable. And I'm not saying that I deserved it. Nor does my forgiveness mean that I will not actively avoid any repetition. Forgiveness has nothing to do with your wrongness or rightness or mine. Forgiveness simply acknowledges what is. To forgive means that I finally accept that what happened, happened. It was the way it was. I can hold the past tightly to my bosom, savoring my rightness, taking it into my identity, and in the process, watch past grief become a habit of despair. I can watch anger become bitterness and past helplessness become today's futility. Or I can stop insisting that the past be different than what it was. It was the way it was. I cannot change it. When I accept what happened, it does not mean that I will have no more sadness. But it means that sadness will no longer have me. There will still be grief, but grief will not possess me. I may still feel pain, but the pain will not consume me. Healing lies in allowing myself to feel the fullness of my anger, my pain, my grief, and then accepting what happened is the past, over. Thus I eliminate the power of the past to affect today. Like I say, these cycles of the seasons and the cycles of plant life affect me deeply and speak to me. And this one, this is especially for you, Steve.
Yeah, do it.
This one is called Winter Tree. You heard me do this before. The sap has retreated. The leaves have fallen. The tree is inactive, dormant, asleep, or so it seems. But if I look inside within the place from which the leaf detached, there's a lot happening. As the darkness dominates the outer world, there, hidden from sight, creation is happening. In that spot, the tree cells are dividing, and each cell is becoming two new cells, which are half the size of the original. They're dividing again and again and again, and each time multiplying in number but dividing in size. So that even though there will soon be thousands of cells, from the outside, nothing appears to be happening. Then, a miracle of creation occurs. The cells begin to differentiate. What was until that moment a homogeneous mass now begins to take the shape of the leaf that it will become. The cells begin to specialize. They become the surface, or the stem, or the stomata, or the veins. They even become the casing which the leaf will shed. And as the days begin to lengthen, we now find inside that little nub an entire leaf in miniature, fully formed, complete, composed of extremely small, tiny cells. Outside, it still looks as if nothing of significance is happening. Finally, the urgency and immediacy of spring is upon the world. The sap rises, flooding each of the minuscule leaf cells, puffing, pumping, blowing them up to full size, and the leaf explodes into view. That is its birth, but not its creation. The light has called forth that which had already been completed in darkness. And so too, we give to the world that which was created in our darkness, in our quiescence, when from outward appearance, nothing of significance seemed to be happening. From the dark void of potential within each of us, all our creations spring. Feeling dirty, unworthy, despicable, all of those words that get attached to you because of what happened. And it was being able to talk to people who understood that helped me. It's like finding out that other people didn't see me the way I thought I was, I thought I was horrible. I thought I was tainted. I'm trying to find the word. Slimy comes to mind. Stuff like that. I thought that's who I was, and I had to put this mask on, or else other people would really see who I really was. But what I finally discovered, when there were enough people around me who I could talk to, who talked to me, who I finally recognized as people who understood, then I started to be able to see them through their eyes and see that I wasn't this horrible, awful, terrible person. In fact, there's a couple of poems in the book about this. One is called Monster, and but yes, it's like there is that, and my hope is that people who have experience that. People who have that sense in themselves find others. Find other people who say, yes, I was there. That happened to me. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't, and I don't have to carry it anymore. I don't have to do this anymore. I don't have to see myself with those eyes anymore. I can look at the world in a new way. So, I've got one more that I would like to read. And it's the final poem in the book. It's called Faith. It seemed like a paradox at first that the uncovering of pain should bring with it the discovering of faith. Growing over the years, faith was not simply hope or belief or trust. It was the whisper barely heard, subliminal almost, which called to my true self, to the self which desires rather than wants, which feels passion rather than lust, joy rather than happiness, and peace rather than contentment. It is the self of knowing rather than believing. It was from an ever-strengthening faith foundation that I drew courage to find the lost fragments of myself. And from this foundation that I found purpose and direction. I began a journey out of darkness into light, not even aware at first of that which guided my feet, only growing aware gradually until there came a time when I knew my guide and I journeyed willingly and consciously. I have faith that pain exists in this world as an opportunity for healing. And only because healing has not yet been accomplished does pain still continue to exist. Those whose lives have been filled with pain have the greatest opportunity. They are the ones called most strongly to accomplish healing for themselves and through them for the world.